Covers how each of the technologies that came out of ancient Mesopotamia apply to the 7 characteristics of civilization. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at how the invention of the plow and irrigation assisted with the characteristic of having a stable food supply. If you like, but helped the development of their civilization. This little mini-series for Mesopotamia is going to include what cities developed in Mesopotamia and what ideas or inventions did Sumerians pass on to other civilizations. In this episode, we discussed the 7 characteristics of civilization, and we discussed a little bit how they applied to the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia. We discussed how Mesopotamia is also known as the land between 2 rivers, and that Mesopotamia is found between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. Mesopotamia is located in the Middle East in the land also known as the Fertile Crescent. Now, the major city that developed in is Sumer. Sumer is where we will see the creation of a number, if not all, of our inventions that we're going to be talking about in this episode, as well as the following one. The beginning of ancient Mesopotamia was in 14,000 BCE when people began to create. Now, these communications of Mesopotamia. Technologies that were used and that we still use today coming from ancient Mesopotamia. These communities created the first written language that we now know as cuneiform. By 3000 BCE, Mesopotamia was under people, and it was home to several large city-states, which included Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, Uruk, Kish, and Ur. Now, there were a multitude of inventions that came out of ancient Mesopotamia, and today we're going to be focusing on irrigation and the plow. Now, we get the invention of the wheel, which was a pottery wheel. Issues with irrigation came from the very thing that made the soil so fertile, which was silt, having the very first mass-produced pottery. Most likely this is because they also developed the wheel, as I mentioned previously, and the wheel was meant to be a pottery wheel. It made turning out these large vessels as well as small vessels much faster and easier in the long run. Domestication of cats. Now, cats started to show up because the mice and the rats were there, as well as any other small critters that they could catch, and people began to realize that cats were helping them to preserve their grain stores. Ingredients that really helped make civilization possible. Developed in ancient Mesopotamia between 3600 and 3500 BCE. As one of the primary building blocks of our 7 characteristics of civilization and of civilizations themselves, writing was one of the most important aspects that helped us to grow. Art, architecture, government, and a number of other characteristics of civilization would not exist. The reason for this is that without the written word, we would have had no way of recording our histories, religious practices, as well as writing down legal contracts, laws, and so many other aspects of civilization that we now use to study how people once lived. Written language was cuneiform, and it was created by the Sumerians. Writing most likely led to the creation of multiple things, one of which being the stele, which is a large stone tablet on which documentations, including the Akkadians, eventually used by multiple other civilizations, including the Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Elamites, Hatti, Hittites, and Hurrians. Gilgamesh was one such epic literature, and the reason why this became so important and why I'm including it in this section, as well as giving it its own episode, is because the Epic of Gilgamesh also is showing us the relations of the hero story, which is a major portion of their religious practice. It is actually a long narrative that celebrates heroic deeds about ancient Mesopotamia. Our standard for today is again going to be standard 2, which is to describe Mesopotamian civilization and identifying the 7 characteristics of civilization. Science possible because it made it more tangible, and they could actually document what they were doing and develop into the original theories on mathematics, as well as astronomy, astrology, medicine, and time, or really how we have our concepts of time today. Math did end bookkeeping, but it also became an important aspect of architecture. Most likely invented the concept of the Pythagorean theorem long before Pythagoras was born. Sumerians also are the ones who created how we think of time today. Now, they used what they called the sexagesimal system in order to develop the 60-second minute and the 60-minute hour. In order to set up how our day is broken down into the 24 hours, the Sumerians used a sundial, which was yet again another one of their inventions, in order to break down our day into 12 hours predominantly of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. Another combination of the characteristics of civilization that we see happens very often is the combination of art and architecture with government and religion. Sumerians were the first civilization to have physicians. These doctors would prescribe various medicines for specific ailments as well. The first type of doctor is an asu, which this doctor is most similar to what we would consider a traditional doctor, was an asipu. This person was more like an herbalist or really a holistic healer. It also led to the sailboat and the development of navigation. With sailing and the development of navigation would have been utilized the science of astronomy and astrology. Now, the reasoning for this is because most likely the ancient sailors would have ended up utilizing the stars for their navigation purposes. How these Sumerian inventions would have helped further other civilizations as well. I hope you're at the myths and mythologies of ancient Mesopotamia, as well as taking a myth that we're going to look at is Dumuzi's death. Now, Dumuzi is also known as Tammuz in the Akkadian version of the religion, called Inanna's descent. In the myth Inanna's descent, we see how the goddess Inanna, also known as Lady of the Date Clusters, set apart on ruling the Netherworld, and she tried to depose her older sister, the queen of the Netherworld, Malua, which was a coastal region of the Indian Ocean, and Dilmun, now known as Bahrain. It also tells how he gave them their characteristics, after which he turned these and Tigris rivers to the marshes, the sea, and the rains, and then to instituting one fast after another of the god of the sweet waters, rivers, and marshes, Sin, the god of thunderstorms, floods, and the plow, Ninurta, and the underworld figure, Ninazu and Enugi. Sin's sons were the god and judge of the gods, Utu, the rain god Ishkur, also known as Adad in Akkadian, and his daughter, the goddess of war, love, also known in Akkadian as Ishtar. Inanna's ill-fated young husband was the herder god Dumuzi, in Akkadian known as Tammuz. Today's lesson on ancient Mesopotamian mythology. However, there is much more, and I do encourage you to research if you have any interest in finding out more about ancient Mesopotamian mythologies, as well as the religious practice of that culture. Now, one of the things that I will say is that with goddesses, both in this lesson as well as in the Epic of Gilgamesh. I hope you enjoy specifically ancient Mesopotamia, which is the first civilization we'll be getting into in this series. If you like ancient Mesopotamia, Mesopotamia is also known as the land between two rivers. It runs between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, and that term Mesopotamia is where the writing of cuneiform originally developed. Now, this writing is most likely utilized in the creation of calendars as well as the documentation of the histories of Mesopotamia and Sumer. And as we look, we can also see that one of the creations of the Mesopotamians was the calendar. The Mesopotamian solar calendar actually had 2 seasons, crescent, after the vernal equinox. The Mesopotamians were actually very good astronomers, and in this, they were able to realize that we are a heliocentric planet. They knew that the Earth revolved on its own axis and then also revolved around the sun. This is part of the technologies that actually were created by ancient Mesopotamia's and Sumerian societies. A notion that actually goes with the stable food supply is irrigation. Now we are looking at art and architecture. Now we are going to go more in depth in the technologies as well as art and architecture and religion and government, all of these different aspects of ancient Mesopotamia. However, for this purpose, we're just giving a quick overview so you understand how each of the 7 characteristics of civilization comprises of Sumerian Earth revolved on its own axis and then also revolved around the sun. This is part of the technologies that actually were created by ancient Mesopotamia's and Sumerian societies. Mention that actually goes with the stable food supply. Now, the development of irrigation did occur in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was located on a large... Looking at today is Ancient Civilizations Map and Timeline. Now, on this map, we can see that there are a lot of different civilizations listed. We're going to start with the oldest and work our way forward. So first up, we have Ancient Mesopotamia, which existed from 3500 to 2000 BCE. We also had the Indus Valley, which was there from 2500 to 1700 BCE. Ancient Egypt, which existed from 3100 to 1070 BCE, and the Huanghe Valley, which existed from 1700 to 1122 BCE. So these are the 4 primary civilizations, that and ancient Rome from 509 BCE to Mesopotamia. Now, the ancient Mesopotamians had 2 rivers. They had the Tigris and the Euphrates. And we can see again that the major cities here all show up along waterways. So we have the Persian Gulf, we have the Tigris and the Euphrates, and then our map is giving us a key here, which is showing us that fertile area of early agriculture is denoted by that green shading. So along these rivers and along the Mediterranean, people were able to actually produce agriculture and produce food. This is and why we study. Thank you again for